baby boomers.
Used to be with it.
Millennials.
Okay, boomer.
Generation X.
What's going on?
And Gen Z. What do they have in common? Not a lot, it turns out. But one thing they can agree on is that this is the political podcast they want to listen to. Welcome to Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at political events, news, and happenings across the world and at home through a generational lens. Your hosts are Dr. Emily Stacy and Professor James Davenport, two political scientists from Rose State College. But the views expressed on this program are solely the views of the host and their guests and do not reflect the views of Rose State College, its administration, faculty, or students. Coming up on today's program.
People in power benefit if there is a screen between the process and the people. Part of what led me to being part of this initiative is trying to remove those layers of complexity that keep people from understanding that for the people, by the people, really kind of needs the by the people part to be fully engaged. There is a number that seriously concerns me, and that number is 50. Of the 50 states, we rank last in voter participation. Hey, I'm insulted you added boomer in there.
I know.
I'm actually Gen X, proud Gen Xer, graduated from high school in 1986, so I know good music.
And now, here are James and Emily. Good morning. Normally I would say good morning, Emily, but today Emily is not here. And so you all are stuck with just me, which is going to be fine. We have a fantastic guest, which I'm going to introduce you all to here in a minute. I do want to say we are recording this the Friday before Election Day, so you probably won't hear it until after the election, but hopefully you will have went and voted, and hopefully we'll know who the next president is going to be. I actually have a small little wager with a colleague over how long it will take for us to actually know who is the next president, hopefully sooner rather than later. I want to introduce our guest. This is Dr. A.J. Griffin. She is the president and CEO of the Potts Family Foundation, whose mission is to enhance nonprofit capacity and to fund initiatives that improve early childhood programs in Oklahoma. Dr. Griffin served for 6 years in the Oklahoma State Senate, earning recognition for her work on juvenile justice, child welfare, healthcare, criminal justice reform. For her work, Dr. Griffin received many accolades, including the prestigious Kate Bernard Oklahoma Child Advocate of the Year Award. Prior to her legislative career, Dr. Griffin was an educator and nonprofit executive. She currently sits on several boards, including the Oklahoma Institute for Child Advocacy, the Oklahoma Academy for State Goals, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, and the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits. She's also been named one of the 50 most influential non-elected Oklahomans by the Journal Record. Dr. Griffin earned her undergraduate degree from Oklahoma State University and a master's degree in education from the University of Central Oklahoma. And she recently defended her doctoral dissertation and earned her Doctor of Education in Learning and Organizational Change from Baylor University. Today, we're going to be visiting with Dr. Griffin about her current efforts to increase voter turnout by reforming Oklahoma's primary election process. Dr. Griffin, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
We are excited. Emily and I have talked about election reforms from a variety of directions in capacities. She was very disappointed she wasn't going to get to be a part of this conversation. I will try to do my best to ask some of the questions that she would have asked if she could have been here. But first, with all guests, we have some icebreaker questions. So we're going to run through these a little quickly. But what are you, Generation X, Millennial, Boomer, Other? Where do you land?
Hey, I'm insulted you added boomer in there.
I know.
I'm actually Gen X, proud Gen Xer, graduated from high school in 1986, so I know good music.
Awesome. Yeah, I tell my kids all the time, music got good in the 80s, and it's never been better. It just did. Right?
Well, I will say there's some good music out there right now. My husband and I try to keep up on it. It's good, but the 80s, I think it was peak.
And it's the one play I will say, I'm not normally a nostalgia kind of person, but 80s music, I think the attraction for me is there's a little nostalgia going on.
Oh,
there,
yeah.
You know, Emily is a millennial, and we're always back and forth about, she tends to find more millennial guests than Gen X guests, and I always feel outnumbered. So I'm glad to have another Gen Xer on the show. Okay. What are you currently reading, watching, or listening to?
So on my nightstand is The Poisonwood Bible.
Okay.
Barbara Kingsolver. So it's one of her novels. I hadn't read that one yet. It's been around for a few years. So that's the hard book that I'm reading. On my Audible, while I'm in the car, I'm listening to one called The People We Keep. It's a work of nonfiction. And then next to my bathtub, I usually have 3 going at once. I'm reading Jesus and John Wayne. So a little political commentary.
I've heard a little bit about that.
Yeah. On Audible, I go back and forth between nonfiction and fiction. I usually have at least one nonfiction and then one fiction going at the same time. So that's what all I've got right now.
I totally understand having more than one book going on at the same time. I tend to do that too. I usually at Christmas time, part of my wish list that I give to my family is some books that I want. And I usually get them, and then it takes me all year to try to move through them.
Are you on Goodreads?
I am not.
Okay, we need to get you on Goodreads so we can share a reading list.
Okay, we can do that. What is your favorite social media platform?
I am a big Instagram fan.
Okay, all right.
Instagram seems to be happier than the other social media platforms. So I scroll through X and I do Facebook for work a lot, but my favorite is Instagram.
Very good. Very good. I am right there with you. I am on X and Facebook. Sometimes I get on X and I'm like, I just can't do this. It can get really, really negative. I try to filter and, have my feed where I'm not just getting, and I definitely try to avoid most of the election kind of related or heavy politics stuff. There's some academics I like to follow. There are some other folks, but even then, you can just get into that trap of getting constantly negative feedback, and it's not good for your mental health.
No. Instagram's a happy place. It's usually, I have pictures of, I follow some great folks. Neil Harbison is a guy, he's former chef and he's an author, but he lives in Thailand and he rescues dogs.
Interesting.
And
okay.
so I love to watch his Instagram feed because it's rehabilitating street dogs in Thailand. I mean, it's a great way to make yourself, it improves your day. It doesn't make it worse.
Very nice. Very nice. I am probably just going to have to break down and get on Instagram. I have resisted, and I tell my students all the time, I feel like the old man in the room who, you get past Facebook, X, and LinkedIn, and I'm not sure what else is out there, and they have to keep me up to date. So.
It's the only one that I think might actually make your day better, as opposed to the other ones.
Then I definitely need to try that.
Yeah.
Okay. What is your favorite pastime or hobby?
We talked about, I'm a voracious reader.
Okay.
It is my favorite pastime and hobby, and started to write a little bit. Believe it or not, doing a dissertation actually made me enjoy writing. So I've been doing more writing recently, but I've been trying to find a hobby for years. I mean, I was a mom and a full-time job and a mom. My kids are now grown. So I've been trying to find a hobby, and pretty much I just go back to the books. It's my thing. When I was younger, I was a musician for a long time.
Okay. What instrument?
I played tenor sax and bassoon in concert band at Oklahoma State University. So was in the Cowboy Marching Band, which it's homecoming weekend in Stillwater. So I love the Cowboy Marching Band and support them. I guess you could say one of my hobbies is serving on nonprofit boards because it tends to take up all my extra energy.
I actually played the alto sax in band.
Well, I started in fifth grade with alto, but switched to tenor. I still have my alto that I got when I was a fifth grader.
Oh, really?
I've had it refurbished.
Oh, wow. That's
so it
awesome.
looks great while it sits in the case I'm playing.
All right. What is one event that occurred in your lifetime that has the most impact on your political views and beliefs?
It's hard to narrow it down to one. I saw this question and I started thinking about being the summer before my senior year in high school, the summer of 1985, the hearings with about the Iran Contra affair, and listening to testimony, and just hearing that was actually, it was probably the first time I really dug down and actually paid attention. And it was before I was even old enough to vote. But my approach towards service was more shaped by 9/11. Like many of us, I was a teacher in Guthrie Public Schools and had small children. And as a mom, seeing that unfold and understanding that whether we like it or not, your life, you can get so busy in your day to day, just living and caring for the people that you love and trying to be a good friend. But that the decisions made by powerful men on the other side of the world do impact our lives.
Absolutely.
And so I think that probably inspired me not to sit on the sidelines, to actually be active. And this was long before I'd ever been recruited to run for office. But just as a mom, knowing I can't ignore this stuff, it does impact the quality of my life and my children's lives.
Well, that kind of leads into our first real question about the project you're working on now. But what sparked your interest in public policy and in politics? It sounds like that was certainly a catalyst, at least one, in this.
Well, I've started as an advocating for children's programs. So it's really how I got started. I ran a small nonprofit, that served Logan County. And we had a lot of state contracts. So I was interacting with a lot of state agencies and knew that the decisions they made impacted my ability to be able to serve my community. So spent some time at the state capitol talking to legislators about, here's this decision that you've made, here's how it impacts my ability to do my job and to take care of kids that are struggling and families that need assistance and individuals that were in the drug court program that we oversaw. So I knew the connection between public policy and my work, and was recruited, like most women, was actually asked to consider running for office. And because I really hadn't considered it before. I wasn't one of these folks that grew up wanting to have a title like that. But the opportunity, the timing was good. I was in a position where I felt like I knew some things that could benefit the legislature, had an experience that was practical, that was kind of unique. There weren't a lot of people with a social services background who'd been boots on the ground, or had been a classroom teacher, really kind of knew the impact of those policy decisions on the people that are really trying to do the work. I always say that nothing really happens at the state capitol. We just rearrange the words and rearrange the numbers, and those decisions either make it easier or harder for other people to do their work. And so understanding that process made it a lot easier. And I actually went through a leadership training program. I think it was 2004 or something. I mean, it's been roughly 20 years ago, taught by Ann Roberts. Ann Roberts is a very well-known child advocate. She ran the Oklahoma Institute for Child Advocacy for a number of years. And it was a program funded by the Annie E. Casey Foundation called Kids Count Leadership. And because of that experience, I knew the legislative process. And I knew how a bill was made. I knew that, knew about engrossment. I knew about versions. I even knew what it meant to strike title to a piece of legislation. So when I was recruited to run for office, it wasn't intimidating.
You were ahead of the game. You were way ahead of the game if with that kind of background.
Well, it used to drive me crazy because people would talk about, well, you got to be in this building all these years to know this process. I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. Just be paying attention beforehand. And I encourage any voter to really understand how it works. People in power benefit if there is a screen between the process and the people. And part of what led me to being part of this initiative is trying to remove those layers of complexity that keep people from understanding that for the people, by the people, really kind of needs the by the people part to be fully engaged.
So you ran for state senate. This was, you were elected in 2012, right?
2012.
If I remember right, you said that you were filling an unexpired term. And so this was something, obviously, you had been involved as we were discussing. You knew the process. But what really catalyzed it and said, yes, this is the time I need to take this step and go in this direction?
One of the programs that we oversaw at Logan Community Services, which is the agency I ran at that time, was the drug court program.
Okay.
And Governor Fallon and Terry White, who ran the Department of Mental Health, had presented pieces of legislation referred to as Smart on Crime, the first crack at criminal justice reform.
Right.
In a time where it was really unpopular and it did not go well. In fact, Governor Fallon took several hits from the party at that time. And I had firsthand knowledge, boots on the ground experience with programs like a drug court program, and saw how intervention and services for individuals with criminal backgrounds could be really helpful. And I thought, if I know this and this isn't going well, I might be able to contribute. And so we didn't make great strides in criminal justice reform while I was still in. This was prior. I left in 2018. We made baby steps. In fact, then Speaker T.W. Shannon and I ran one of the very first bills we actually were able to get signed into law that allowed individuals to go with fines and fees to go back, if they'd served their time, to go back to the original sentencing jurisdiction and request those fines or fees be either decreased or waived. Okay. And that was signed into law, and it had immediate impact on people's lives. And that issue of criminal justice reform, and it's been very encouraging to see it become more popular. Yes. And we've been able to make strides. The people spoke with the passage of State Question 780 and 781. But it was one of the things that I thought I could bring to the table. And once you realize, I know some things that they need, that encouraged me. It wasn't because I really cared about all the pomp and circumstance of the office. Sure. And in fact, I said I have the best title in politics now, which is former.
I think when it comes to criminal justice, a lot of people don't understand. We think, we have to punish these people for what they did. And they don't realize that in many ways that the punishment extends well beyond whatever the sentence was that they were given, and causes a lot of difficulty for them to re-enter society, to get a job, to reunite with their family, all of these things that are going to lessen the probability that they're going to commit another crime. And yet we make it extremely difficult for them to move in that direction.
Right. One of the things I do spend my time now, one of my other hobbies is I am one of the newer members of the Oklahoma County Detention Center Trust.
Yes.
The famous jail trust, and trying to bring the experience of all these years of policymaking and service to that board to try to make changes and improve the conditions. It is a very difficult job, and running a county jail is probably one of the toughest jobs in Oklahoma, regardless of the county. They're under-resourced. They've got very complex issues that are under their roof without necessarily the support that they need. So trying to help equip that facility to help people start to re-enter, because the recidivism rate at the Oklahoma County Jail right now is 70%. So obviously just sending someone to jail doesn't work. Right. So how do we wrap around all those other services? How do we help people address their childhood trauma, which is what we do at POTS with a lot of our trauma-informed work and the importance of early childhood experiences. Everything goes together, and we cannot separate ourselves from the policymakers, because those policy decisions impact our lives. They either make us safer, our lives easier, and our lives better, or they make us less safe, harder, and less enjoyable.
I worked in Oklahoma County for a number of years. My office was on the same floor as the late Bob Ravitz, who was the public defender for a long time. And we would have lots of conversations. And it was that experience that really impressed upon me the reality that, we have a lot of people sitting in the Oklahoma County Jail, not because they've been convicted of anything, but just because they've been accused of something, charged with something, and they don't have the bail money to get out. And so it was those conversations in it says, are we really doing society as a whole, not just to mention that individual and their immediate family, but are we doing society as a whole a service by the way we do this. And so it was very, very enlightening to have that experience and to really get to have some good conversations with someone who was intimately knowledgeable with the process.
And we have engaged the help of some experts that I think will help make the decisions better. At the Oklahoma County Detention Center, I have a lot of confidence in the current leadership. I think she has the capacity to make some changes, and we really need the county to figure out where to build the new one.
That would be helpful, right?
Yes, that is not our that is not our job. Our job is to help oversee the operations of the current one, which that place, holy schmoly. Physical facilities do matter. They really do. Quality of environment does impact mental health.
Sure.
And the number of people we care for that have serious mental illness that are in jail, none of it's good. And the understanding that after I left the legislature, got more involved in the municipal and county levels of government. Mm-hmm. And now I'm a huge fan of municipal government. I actually think across the state that some of our best public servants are local mayors and members of city councils that are really doing hard work. They're under-resourced. One of my favorite public servants in the entire state of Oklahoma is the mayor of Guyman, a gentleman named Kim Peterson, who is creative and tenacious about his community under very difficult circumstances and does some really amazing things and gets creative. And he is a bulldog. He wants what's best for his people and will fight really hard for it. And I just love getting to interact with those municipal leaders.
I tell my students all the time, presidential elections, members of they get all the attention, but the real work is often what's happening at the local level, at your city council, at your county commission, at these places where the decisions that they make are directly impactful on the quality of lives that the people who live in those areas are able to live.
A wonderful segue into what we're really going to talk about today, because the municipal government in the state of Oklahoma runs a unified system. Mm-hmm. Everyone, right now, we know that there's a mayoral race in Tulsa, nonpartisan race, but everybody knows the party history of everybody involved. Right. So it's not that political parties aren't part of the process. It's just that the importance is diminished significantly when we change our processes. Yeah.
Well, that leads us to, you've been involved with a lot of issues and causes, as we've discussed. What is it about the primary process that has caught your attention and your concern lately? And how did you become involved with the Oklahoma United effort to change the state's primary election process?
There is a number that seriously concerns me, and that number is 50.
Okay.
Of the 50 states, we rank last in voter participation. And I generally tend to try to be very objective when I look at data and things. For example, we're 43rd in tax burden, which translates into being 43rd, 45th, 47th in education spending and investment in infrastructure. These two things generally correlate. If we are last in the country in voter participation, there is a why that goes with that. And so how do you objectively look at, I don't think it's because Oklahomans don't care who they elect. I don't think that's it. I was an elected official. I have been on the ballot. Yeah, they care. But there's something about the way that we're approaching our elections that makes us last in voter participation. So that's really the number that kind of inspired me to get involved and take a look for myself and try to figure out, why is that? What are we doing wrong? One of the positions I held in the Senate was the chair of the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee oversees election processes, pieces of legislation that came through. And I very distinctly remembered the pro tem at the time, several times, proposed legislation that would make county elections nonpartisan. Okay. And it didn't pass for a multitude of reasons. But based on that experience, I also knew there was an interest of people in constituents to change the way that we elect some of our elected officials. So does it make sense for us to really evaluate our election system? And the answer is yes, it does. We need to take a look at it.
So let's talk about, I guess, the kind of reform that you think would be helpful. Well, first, let's make sure everybody understands how the process works currently, right? So in Oklahoma, we have primary elections, and we have is mostly a closed primary system. The state allows the parties to decide if they want to let independents vote in their primaries. Currently, only the Democrat Party does. The Republican Party does not. The Libertarian Party, which is the only other recognized party in the state, they do not as well. So if you're an independent and you want to vote in a primary in Oklahoma, your only option is the Democrat primary, right? And so if you're a registered Republican or Democrat or Libertarian, you are limited to voting in the primary of the party that you are affiliated with. All right. So let me ask this: what's the problem with that? Right. What is it about that you feel like this is part of the problem of why we have this tremendously low voter turnout?
Well, let's talk about the numbers again. So we aren't just talking about federal offices or the state legislature or statewide offices. We're also talking about those county offices. And a great example is this year, this election cycle, there are 77 counties in the state of Oklahoma. Only 6 have contested sheriff's races at the general election.
I saw
6.
that number and I was like...
So in 71 counties, there was no race on the general election for sheriff, for the chief law enforcement officer of the county, a very important position. So we're obviously disenfranchised at some point there. And so if we look at the state legislature, right now in the state, we're approaching a general election that with a presidential year, there are very, very, very few even interesting state legislative races. Literally less than one hand can we count the elections that are contested and even on the ballot. So there are 391 federal, state, and county offices. Only 54 had a candidate from each major party file in. That's 86% of those races already done.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And of those races where there actually are a Democrat and a Republican both on the ballot, very, very few of them would be considered competitive.
Right.
So it's not that this is a party issue. It's just there is no real reason. And when people say, well, I don't vote because my vote doesn't count. What in Oklahoma you can say is I very rarely go vote because there's nothing for me to vote for. Mm-hmm. And so these are taxpayer funded elections. Taxpayers should get to participate in them. Right. End of story.
And the closed system reduces the ability to do that, right? If I don't have an election in November, obviously, right. And if I couldn't vote in the primary because my party that I'm affiliated with didn't have a candidate on the ballot, or I'm a registered independent, then from that standpoint, I think the argument is you've basically disenfranchised a significant portion of your electorate because they don't get to choose who that person is going to be.
Right. And so by default, we have a very small percentage of the Oklahoma voter that is electing who we send to Congress. Mm-hmm. A very small percentage of the Oklahoma voter that's electing a state legislator or a state senator, because it's only those that are voting in the primary in many jurisdictions that have any say-so. And as a result, we have seen a steady decline. Since 1996, we were 25th in voter turnout. We were middle of the road. So us Gen Xers, we were voting back in 1996, unlike some of these millennials. And it has been a steady decline. And we also know, if you understand the history of the parties in the state of Oklahoma, we had Democrat supermajorities for 100 years. Then we were tied for a little bit. Then we flipped the other direction and had these Republican supermajorities. So the parties themselves have been part of eliminating a lot of the voters. Mm-hmm. And you don't, as a elected official, it does impact the way that you govern. Okay. If you're elected by a very small percentage of the people that you represent, are you inclined to actually represent all of the people? And all the people don't get a say-so in whether you are reelected or elected in the first place.
I'm I'm a political scientist, so I like delving into these kinds of questions and I think a lot of the research that we see coming out of the political science literature is very much when you have these kind of situations, you have candidates that appeal to the most ideological members of their party because that's who they need to get through those primaries. And then they govern in a way that is consistent with kind of the ideological edges of their party, as opposed to maybe more closely aligned with what we would say the median voter in their district or state might be, right?
Well, one of my guiding principles as a person is that I am kind with people, but I'm brutal with systems. And this is a system that needs some brutality, and we need to evaluate the system. It has very little, actually, it has nothing to do with the individual people that are being elected. It's how do we evaluate the system in order to get a system that provides us true representative government and that allows all voters, all of us, regardless of what, a party affiliation you have. I look at parties a little bit like being a Sooner or Cowboy. We believe strongly that ours is the best. Yeah. But at the end of the day, we really, really want to put it on the field. Now, I'm a cowgirl, so I would just remind everybody that the last Bedlam we won. But if there's a reason why in football we talk about the record, the winning and losing, but you always played the game.
Right.
And I want everybody to have to play the entire game. I want to put everybody on the field and every voter have a reason to engage in the process.
All right. So what's the solution, or at least what is one of the solutions that you believe will help address this issue?
So I'm part of a group that has evaluated all the different options that there are and ways to change primaries. And we advocate for a unified primary. Okay. Which simply means everyone keeps their party affiliation. It's public. There's a little R, a little D, or a little I, or a little L right behind you, your name if you're a candidate. But everybody goes on one ballot. Top two go on to the next round. Okay. So almost a little bit like a tournament. Back to my sports analogy.
Okay, so you have this system where you basically have a giant primary. All the people from all different parties. So you could have 5 Republicans and 3 Democrats, a Libertarian, a couple of independents. They're all running in that same primary. And then whoever gets the 2 candidates that get the most votes, they would make it onto the general election ballot. Is that basically the idea?
It.
Okay.
Pretty simple.
So what is the benefit of that process that you think is better than the system that we have now? What is the advantage of that?
Well, if you think about who's determining who's on the ballot in a general election, most of the time we don't have a general election. We have very rarely, we have 2 major parties that are even represented in the primary system. So we have so many state legislative races, for instance, that are already decided. So they don't go on to November. So in the primary, we have generally less voter turnout as well. So we have that such a small percentage that are actually deciding. The benefit is that of the voters and the taxpayers that fund these elections are actually allowed to participate in them.
Okay.
So the party's not deciding when you get to vote. You are allowed as a voter. It's about your freedom to choose, regardless of party, who's going to represent you and who will be making decisions on your behalf. As a candidate, if you're responsible to all the voters, you're going to campaign differently. You're probably going to govern differently, and you're certainly going to approach your constituents differently, because everyone's vote matters, not just a small percentage.
When we think about this process of doing that, so now you have, in effect, what looks like a general election ballot, but it's for the primary, and you can have multiple candidates of the parties competing in that primary against each other. And I'm assuming the voter obviously is not restricted on which candidates they can vote for, right? So regardless of whether or not I'm a Republican or a Democrat, I can go in there and vote for whatever candidate that I wish to vote for. Is that
we have the freedom to select the candidate that you choose, not that's chosen for you by a political party.
Okay.
And think about this. Oklahomans already vote this way. This is the process for municipal elections.
Okay.
In every city in the state. So it's not new and foreign. It's just a different way to do the other elections that have traditionally been partisan.
With the exception that most municipal elections, I think all in Oklahoma, are nonpartisan. Is that so?
Well,
the candidates are not identified.
They're not
by their
identified
party.
on the ballot, but
but everybody kind of knows.
Everybody kind of knows.
You kind of know. I will say, in municipal elections, from what I've observed, now it might be different in different communities, but the Republicans and Democrats are a lot closer together policy-wise at the municipal level than they might seem to be at the state or the national level.
Well, they're elected in a nonpartisan election.
And so maybe that's something we need to be thinking about as well. There is one state, Nebraska, that their state elections are technically nonpartisan as well, right? Members of their legislature are elected in.
Actually, those of us that have a closed primary system, the states with the closed primary are in this significant minority.
Okay.
Most states have a open primary system
so
of varying styles.
Let's talk about that for a second. So how many states do have this relatively closed primaries? If you look at that,
there are. Let's see, how many states left? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
11 states that still have
closed primary.
Some type of, and then so that roughly means 39 states have some type of open primary.
Right, including neighboring states, Kansas, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana. So this belief that, this is a red or blue issue, completely false. Completely false.
All right, so let's talk about the different variations of open primaries, what we see. How many states have this kind of top two? And then what are some of the other variations that we see as well?
Well, the top two is the most common.
Okay.
And it started in Nebraska, you mentioned, 100 years ago. So Nebraska changed theirs 100 years ago, said, in Nebraska generally tends, they also have a unicameral legislature. So they're kind of an outlier. California and Washington brought those along, and we've seen some major changes there.
Okay.
But there are lots of different styles. There's what Louisiana refers to, I think, as the guerrilla primary.
Right.
There's ranked choice voting, which this Oklahoma legislature has already prohibited in Oklahoma.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, ranked choice voting. But the most, if it's simply about allowing the voter the freedom to vote for whom they want to, this is the simplest approach. Everybody goes on one ballot. You vote once, top two go to the second one, you vote again. Winner wins. We have the advanced in a special election. My first election was a special election. There were 4 members, 4 in my Republican primary.
Okay.
I received the most votes. And because it was a special election, there's no runoff. So I went on to the general. We already have versions of this in some of our other elections, including special elections in the legislature. There's not a runoff. So it also simplifies the process a little bit. Everybody understands a tournament bracket.
Right.
This is it's a tournament bracket. They put everybody in there. We all play against each other once, and the top 2 go on to the next round.
Okay. All right. What has been the impact of opening up these primaries like this on voter turnout? And for me, one of the other issues that I'm also concerned about is electoral competition. In other words, I want to see that voters really have options that are clear and distinct. And so what has been the impact of these on those two things?
The statistics tell us that there's almost immediately at least a 4% voter participation increase.
Okay.
So not dramatic. If you look at the states that have the highest voter turnout have some very different systems.
Sure.
The states that have, say, 80 or 75, 80% voter turnout are using a lot of mail-in ballots. Right. There's a same-day registration. Some of the things that really Oklahoma voters haven't expressed a lot of desire to implement here. they may have a significantly longer early voting period, which we're seeing right now with the long lines and early voting. So there's other tweaks to the system that might have a bigger impact on turnout, but it does improve voter turnout in every jurisdiction that has been implemented.
So now so we're looking at voter turnout in two different ways. So that 4% increase, is that voter turnout in the general election, or is that voter turnout in the primary election?
I believe it's in the general.
Okay.
But it also, if you think about this, if you vote in the primary and the top two move on, you've already, maybe one of those is someone that you voted for. Maybe you voted for the second place person and you move on to the general. It would carry through. So we're going to see it in both phases, I believe.
I didn't have a chance to look. I would almost bet that it certainly increased turnout in the primary election as well, because now voters have more options. They can really see that whether it's a candidate from their party, or maybe they've stumbled onto a candidate from a party they're not registered with, but they really like them, they have a chance to cast a vote. Right?
Let me give you an example. My grandmother-in-law, she passed away a couple years ago at 101. So think about what she had seen in her lifetime. She was a lifelong Democrat. I'm on the ballot. I'm not a Democrat. I'm in a highly contested 4-way Republican primary. She changed her party affiliation to be able to vote for me. So Oklahomans are doing this a lot. I don't have the statistics, but I would love to talk to Paul Xerix, the Oklahoma State Election Board Secretary, about party switching. We're seeing that quite a bit already. There is a desire by Oklahoma voters to get to vote for the person.
Right.
And it's out there. People are making arrangements. They're going back and forth because they want to be able to vote for the person. There will be more people file and to run for office under this system, because the belief that it's not going to do me any good, I'm the wrong flavor, is eliminated because people can cross ballots. There are people that say we have supermajorities because of straight party voting. I'm not a fan of straight party voting for myself, but I don't necessarily think that it's appropriate to eliminate that as an option for the voter.
Sure.
I think being able to vote for who you want, regardless of party affiliation, will probably help eliminate that as a habit of the Oklahoma voter, because we'll have elections that are based more on the conversation of the entire district instead of an appeal to just a straight party. And that doesn't matter if you're in a rural area or urban area. We see it on both sides, and it's regardless of party affiliation. So many of these races are already decided in June. We'd like to see that changed.
One of the, I guess the type of open primary that I have seen, and maybe that is a little bit more common, is one where they simply say, regardless of your voter registration, you can vote in the primary of your choosing, right? What, from your perspective, why is the top two approach a little bit better as opposed to just doing it that way?
Well, if you have to choose a ballot, you're probably going to choose that ballot based on one race. There's not just one race on a ballot. There's multiple races on a ballot. You may want to vote for the Democrat in sheriff's race and the Republican for state senate. You may want to vote for a Democrat presidential nominee, but you want to vote for the Republican for county clerk. So it devalues the down ballot races. And so this is having everyone on, regardless of whether you're on the top of the ticket or on the bottom of the ticket, having everybody on one ballot really gives the voter the most freedom.
And we do know there is a drop off at the further down the ballot you go. Not as many people vote for those local offices or even state legislative offices as vote for Congress, Senate, or president.
This inverse relationship with the attention that we give elected office is really kind of mind-boggling if you dig into their process. Who you elect for your county sheriff or the county clerk, goodness, we elect county assessors. If you don't think that doesn't impact your day-to-day life, who your assessor is, and goodness, we elect those right now on a closed primary ballot ticket. Right. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. If you should want to be able to have a say in
who's going to
assessing the value of your property to determine your taxation level.
Sure. Okay, so some objections I've heard from people to open primaries, and in fact, we had a brief discussion of this on our most recent episode. But one of the objections that I've heard people bring up were that, well, look, primaries are for the parties to choose who will represent them. And so why should people who don't affiliate with a particular party have the ability to choose that party's nominee? So that's one objection I've heard. I've heard people who discussing California, they're kind of the largest state that has used this, as saying, well, look, if you look at their elections, more often they've got Democrats have a supermajority in that state, relatively close to the supermajority status that Republicans have in Oklahoma. You're basically seeing two Democrats go on to the election most of the time, and they don't see a moderating influence on the candidates there. And then I've heard some people argue that third parties would be in a worse situation because they'd be swallowed up in that big primary, as opposed to being able to be in the general election and having an option to attract voters there. So how would you respond to those? And I know I'm throwing a lot of them at you at once, but those are the main objections I've heard to this. And I wanted to get those out here because I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of respond and how you view the errors in thinking or why you don't think those objections are as valid as the approach that you're advocating for.
Well, let's start with the first one. Mm-hmm. Primaries are for the parties. No, they're not. Elections are for the voters.
Okay.
And in reality, in a closed primary system, party bosses are very frequently choosing the candidate because it is such a small percentage of the voter that has a say-so. So primary elections, state-run, taxpayer-funded elections are not for political parties. Okay. They're for the voters. So that would be my first thing. And I know it is very, very, very fashionable in Oklahoma to poo-poo California. We for all the way up from the highest office in the state, we like to talk about how horrible California is. It's the 11th largest economy in the world.
Right.
So they got something going on out there. And the fact of the matter is, while Democrats maintain a supermajority in California, it has impacted their ability to govern.
Okay.
Prior to changing their system, they went years and were unable to pass a budget. And now California is passing budgets. Part of my career oversaw a lobbying team that worked in California, and they were in Northern California. There are a lot of Republicans in Northern California that get to choose who represents them because of their system, even though in parts of the state there are a lot of Republicans, and it has moderated how they govern. Now, it's not how we govern in Oklahoma. We're not moderated in the other direction, sure, according to us. And we know it's fashionable to talk about how horrible they are, but it is a pretty important state, and it has impacted their ability to govern themselves. Okay. I would say, too, to that, the voters, if there is a supermajority of Democrats in California, it has been decided by the voters.
Okay.
All the voters, not just a small percentage of the voters like we have here in Oklahoma.
Interesting. All right. I want to get your thoughts on some other reforms that I've heard people bantering about. You mentioned ranked choice voting in the legislature. What I would say aggressively trying to prohibit or actually prohibiting ranked choice voting. So I actually am a big fan of ranked choice voting. I think it would do a whole bunch of good stuff for our elections, for the quality of candidates that are actually selected and who get into office. But real briefly, can you describe what that is and if you have any insights as to why you feel like the legislature took that initiative to try to prevent it from taking hold here in Oklahoma?
My theory on why ranked choice voting is fairly complicated.
Mhm.
And you're a political scientist.
Yes.
You probably decent at math. There's a lot of math involved in ranked choice voting. There is. It's a formula. It's complicated. And in the environment that we're living in right now, with election integrity being questioned, the complexity of ranked choice voting isn't necessarily appealing. Even as someone who represented a district, it would be difficult to try to explain that process to the average voter, as opposed to a unified primary, which is very simple, very transparent. It's really easy to count. We've got 2 sets of ballots. That's it. And you think about that from an election integrity. This is a simple system. Everybody's on one thing, one ballot. Top 2 vote getters go on. I mean, if there's a question, easy to do a recount. So from an election integrity, I think this is probably, I prefer it as someone who wants to explain ranked choice voting. And the other is, I'm not interested in this process because of a supermajority. I'm not interested in this process because of the types of people we're electing. I'm really interested in this process because I want the voters to have more of a voice. Gotcha. And so I think that's based on my motivation. Ranked choice voting does not have the same effect on the engagement of the voter necessarily.
Another idea I've heard bantered about by actually people in both parties, both major parties, is opening it up and allowing independents to vote in any primary, regardless. That obviously would not be the dramatic impact that the top 2 system that you would that be a positive step in the right direction, do you think?
It would definitely be a step in the right direction, but we go back to, you still have to choose a ballot. And it separates those up ticket races from the down ticket races. And I really think that especially if you look at our county elections, the fact that those are partisan in nature at all is really incongruent with the work that they're doing. I don't know that electing a conservative or a liberal as county clerk is really important. Right. So if we were going to look at the county races, and it would devalue those even more by forcing voters to choose. It's a step in the right direction, but it doesn't have the same engagement effect that I would like to see in our process.
Very good. Okay. So another idea that I have heard is, what if we opened up primaries in those races where there's not going to be a general election? We know there's not going to be a general election because nobody from any other party but this party filed, and we can open up those primaries. Again, from your standpoint, I'm going to say you probably think, well, that's kind of a half measure. Again, it might be a step in the right direction, but is it going to get us to where we really need to be? Is that correct? Would that be a correct assessment of
right? And the logistics on that. How many different ballots are you going to have? Does each race have its own ballot? It gets very, very complex. Sure. And I do think in this environment, straightforward is going to encourage the voter to not only participate in the process, but also to trust the process and to have faith in the process. Sure. So you wind up printing all kinds of different ballots, and then your volunteer that's getting paid $75 to be there for the day has to figure all this out. Yeah. And then you have the voter saying, well, I know I want to vote for this person for this, but I want to vote for that. I don't think it has the same engaging effect as everybody's on the ballot. Right. And you just go down your ballot and you pick.
We love communication that goes both ways, not just you listening to us pontificate. We would love to hear from our audience. If you have comments, suggestions, or would like to contact us about possibly being a guest on the show, please email notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu.
I've been thinking about this since we knew you were going to be coming on, and I've got all sorts of opinions and such. You've done such a wonderful job of explaining this process and why you think it would work, and I think and that's going to factor into how I consider this as well. So thank you for being such an effective advocate of this, because I think people who don't know much about this, and they don't know how the system, as you mentioned, the system can create particular outcomes. And we might not like those outcomes, but we might be thinking those outcomes are just a result of individuals, and really they're the result of the way the system produces those outcomes.
Right.
Yeah. I want to throw one more out. This was off the top of my head. I was thinking about this the other day. Is what if we just didn't include party affiliation on when we're registering people to vote, right? And you just take that off, and now the parties can't they have to appeal to a broader mass because they don't know who's going to show up and vote in any particular primary. In effect, all voters would be independent, and they could choose whatever primary they wanted to vote in. Again, I know what your response is. They're still going to have to choose a ballot, right?
They're going to have to choose a ballot. And I do think that the parties play an important role in the process.
Uh-huh.
I'm not anti-political party at all. I think they play an important role. Right. The problem we have today is they play an important role.
Sure.
The interest of the party and the party affiliation is trumping an Oklahoma voter's freedom to choose. I
really am taking to your argument that primary elections are not for the parties because the taxpayers are footing the bill for those, and the taxpayers should have a way to participate in those elections regardless. That's an interesting argument that I'm really going to have to chew on a little bit because I think that's a very powerful argument.
It would not eliminate a party's ability to endorse a particular candidate. Right. It would not eliminate a party's ability to fundraise and fund a particular candidate like they do now. It would not eliminate the ability for the party to hold rallies and to do all of the political activity that encourages people to vote one way or another. It just means that the function that is performed by the state is neutral.
Very good. Very good. Let me ask you one last question. If someone wants to know more about this effort, how can they get that information? Is there a website they can go to? Tell us about that.
We encourage you to visit ok-united.org. Okay. It's ok-united.org. Oklahoma United is a group of concerned citizens that are raising money to fund this initiative, that are working to get the word out and to educate the voter on why we think this is important to allow all Oklahomans to have a say in who represents them.
I'm gonna have a follow-up question here. Do you think there will be some type of initiative, petition to move us in this direction in the relatively near future, the next 2 or 3 years?
I would say sooner rather than later. Okay. And stay tuned for an announcement that will be coming very shortly.
Well, our guest today has been Dr. A.J. Griffin of the Potts Family Foundation, and we've been talking about electoral reform. Dr. Griffin, thank you so much for visiting with us today.
It was my pleasure.
I'm going to extend a future invitation already. I think Emily would be very interested in having an episode that was fully discussed, bringing in some people with different perspectives on this. If we were to do that, would you be willing to come back and participate in that conversation?
Oh, happy to. I'd love to talk election reform. I also love to talk early childhood, juvenile justice, any of those things.
Fantastic. We are, you will be hearing from us again.
Okay.
Thank you again. Thanks for our listeners. And I want to remind you that democracy is not a spectator sport. We will see you all next time.
This is Deborah, the resident Gen Z member of the Not My Generation podcast family. Not My Generation is produced in the Possibilities Inc. studio. This episode was produced by Santiago Ramones. It was edited by Santiago Ramones. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Send a voice memo to notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu and you could hear your voice on an upcoming episode. If you liked today's episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and sharing the podcast with others. You can check out previous episodes on any podcast app and on our podcast website at notmygeneration.captivate.fm, where we also provide our show notes. And remember, you can follow Not My Generation on X, formerly known as Twitter, at NMG Podcast, and on Facebook at Not My Generation Podcast. We look forward to interacting with you soon.